Welcome to the Accounting Arc Podcast, where analysis, reaction, and comedy collide to tackle the big topics from the world of accounting and beyond. Join our trio of transformation agents as they discuss the hottest topics in and out of the profession, from breaking down industry trends, to reacting to everyday events, to uncovering the hidden humor in numbers. With wisdom, insight, and a dash of levity, they're proving that accounting isn't just about the numbers. It's about life. Because after all, accounting is in everything. The Accounting Arc Podcast starts now.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Arc Podcast. We have got potentially a controversial, maybe a doozy of a topic here to discuss today, and frankly, a topic that I never ever thought at the beginning of my career would be a topic of conversation. Just to set the stage a little bit, I can remember before I earned my CPA, this will, of course, date me incredibly, but I remember seeing a woman I knew that had the CPA write a check to someone, and her checks had CPA on her check. And I remember seeing that and thinking, I cannot wait to literally, after I got my CPA, the first thing I did was ordered new checks with Byron Patrick CPA on them because I wanted CPA on it. Like, so proud to display the CPA as part of my identity, I guess. And so here we are, fast forward, 20 plus, almost 25 years later. And there's a lot of conversation around what we are beginning to see where national firms, mostly that have these alternative practice structures, which basically allow in states where you cannot have partners, owners in the firm that are non-CPAs, they create an alternative practice structure to allow non-CPAs to become partners in those firms. And it's creating some tension because there are CPAs working in the non-licensed part of the firm who are now being asked or forced in some cases to not display their CPA, which is creating a very surprising environment for me and a challenging environment and a lot of conversation. So have you all talked to folks who are running into the same issues?
Yeah, so actually, I've been aware of this as a state board regulation for a very long time. When I worked at a large national firm, the different states had different rules around how you can display your CPA in your email signature, for example, and what that meant. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting was some states require you to display your CPA with your full legal name as it is printed on your CPA license. And so in those states, if I were to sign off on my email as Liz Mason, CPA, that would be illegal because my full legal name on my CPA license is Elizabeth N. Mason, right? And so I was part of a compliance check for a large firm at one point where we had to go through and figure out what states had what regulations, what did that look like, and who could display their CPA license. And it was a really interesting project, really awful from my perspective, because why would you limit the ability to say I'm a licensed CPA? But that was, 15, almost 20 years ago that we were looking at these rules and making sure that the firm was in compliance with them. Granted, at that point, there was no, talk of, hey, don't use it. It was, if you use it, make sure you're within your state's legal requirements, right? But I've been aware of these conversations for that long because of that project, right? Which was a long time ago. So this isn't a new issue. It's just how people are dealing with the compliance of the regulations.
Yeah, echoing that, I don't, not a new issue. I actually encountered this issue when I started my firm, which is in 2001. So part of in Hawaii, and we're one of the few states that's left that have a two-tiered system. So Liz has been using the word licensed, which we have a licensed CPA level. We also have a permit to practice level, which is above the license
Oh,
level.
wow.
So the license level basically means you have the CPA or you have earned the CPA in the past, but you're not keeping up with CPE. To be permitted, you have to keep up with CPE and you need to be working in a CPA firm. So there's kind of a double layer on there. And the
Mm.
reason it ended up affecting the way I formed my firm was to for me to use my CPA on my business cards and in my email signatures, I had to be a CPA firm. So that was where when I first started off, we were really doing more IT consulting, but I had to form as a CPA firm and I had to go through all the stuff, even though we don't do tax and we don't do audit and we don't do any of the traditional services, so that I could use the CPA on my card. Otherwise, I had to have CPA parentheses, not in public practices, close parentheses. It's very specific how you have to display your CPA otherwise in my state.
That's really interesting because I had the same issue when I started High Rock in Arizona. We had to register as a CPA firm. At that point, because we provided tax services and bookkeeping services and were licensed CPAs, we still had to register as a CPA firm. So twofold, to use our CPA license actively and publicly, we had to register. And for those two reasons, we had to register. Those two reasons have now been withdrawn from the state regulations. So in Arizona, my firm does not perform any services that require it to be a board registered CPA firm. However, if I want to display my CPA or have anyone else on my team, we have many CPAs on our team, use their CPA license, they have to be working for an active CPA firm. And so, if I was a CPA in private practice, it's a different story. There's a different regulation. But because I'm working for a firm and I'm an external consultant, in order to display CPA on my cards, my firm has to be a registered CPA firm, which gets very complex and confusing as well.
Right. And that, I mean, therein lies part of the rub right now with these alternative practice structures. So in an alternative practice structure, what they do is they split the accounting firm into two entities. One is the audit entity, which is required licensed CPA firm entity. And the other is the non-licensed services, the consulting services, the tax services, the CAS services, and they all live in that second structure. And that is also where they have non-CPA partners who own a large majority of that firm. And so what is happening is a lot of CPAs work in that second organization and are being told they cannot hold themselves out as a CPA because of all of these different state regulations that say you're not working for a licensed firm, therefore you cannot present yourself as a CPA unless you're working in a licensed firm. And just to add some complexity, the two organizations, usually one is a LLC and one is a Inc., I believe, and they use the same name, however, just the extension difference. So the general public does not necessarily know, it's not clear to them which organization they're working for, which creates even more confusion for the general public because that's what these rules are supposed to be about, protecting the general public and their understanding of who they are working for and what is happening. So, these rules are making it very difficult. And as a result, these organizations that work across many different states are telling their CPAs, you may be licensed, that's great, but you cannot hold yourself out as a CPA, which is, I mean, I have some humble opinions. Having earned my own the CPA, I consider that license to be mine. And when it comes to whether or not I'm going to display it, I don't think I would work for an employer who would prevent me from presenting that I am a CPA.
Well,
That
I mean, your arm would violate firm policy, so
That's true. There's some states, maybe Hawaii and Arizona, that I can't even walk into technically without violating some state laws.
you're
Um,
a walking violation, Byron.
which
That's
we
not
already
me
knew.
though.
Oh man, yeah, it's causing a really interesting conversation. And Sue Coffey, with the AICPA, she has published some articles discussing, the AICPA's position where they want you to, display the CPA. They have concerns about, the brand as a profession if we are not allowed to present ourselves and show ourselves and what makes the CPA special. And they're actually collecting survey feedback because they're trying to have some conversations and figure out how to navigate this effectively.
What I'm hoping to see from that though, because some of the tenor of the comments that I see are really pointing towards private equity as per se the bad guy in this. Because they're saying, well, it's private equity coming in, they're forcing them, they're creating these alternative practice structures, which we know alternative practice structures existed before private equity was in
Yes.
our industry. And they're really making it like these are the bad guys. But as Liz and I have mentioned, like this issue has been around for literally decades.
Right.
And I do recall as well a time when one of the big four, and I don't remember which one it was, also stopped all of their professionals from putting CPA on their business cards because of this potential violation of state regulation. So when I kind of look at this, in my head, I go, is the problem private equity or is the problem the way the regulation is formed? And again, I kind of look at Hawaii and I go, our regulation really doesn't make sense. Are we really protecting the public by forcing people to put not in public practice if they're not permitted and maintaining their CPE?
Well,
It-
and I think that's like a really big question is should this, first off, should this be regulated by state boards? The use of a credential. I mean, the credential itself is regulated by those state boards. However, there's been a lot of uniform work to get to a point where there's more consistency across the states, right? So I think that's one question that is a good question. Can we, as a profession, propose a law for every state to adopt that gives flexibility in this and says, there are ways to protect the public outside of limiting a professional's capacity to say that they have this, right? Like, are there limits on lawyers? Like, are lawyers not allowed to say they're a lawyer if they're not working for a law firm? Because I don't think that's the case, right? And they can
yeah, I
say
don't
they're a
think so.
Juris Doctor. So I can say I have a master's in accountancy, but I can't say that I have a CPA license when I worked harder for that than I did the other. It seems backwards and like it's causing more harm to the professionals and to the future of
That's
this
right.
profession, right? Like, why would you go into a profession that you can't even like say that you have a credential?
I think you nailed it. It really, we're no longer actually protecting. I think we're harming the public because one of the things that happens as a result is the general public is not going to understand a distinction between a CPA or working with a CPA or working with an accountant. They're just going to lump it all under the same umbrella because they don't know. It's hidden and from even an ethical perspective, I have a really hard time with people who are licensed CPAs held to certain standards and body of ethics, and then masking or hiding the fact that they are licensed is just it very counterintuitive to me when thinking about it from a code of ethics perspective.
Well, the other side of it too is like if I, as a CPA, go and do something bad against our profession, it does not matter if I'm operating as a under a public licensed firm, an
Right.
official CPA firm where I can officially display my CPA license and whatever I want, I can still get a complaint against me
Right.
if I'm
Yeah.
acting in a capacity not having anything to do with a CPA. So if that's the case, like why the double standard, right? If you're going to open this up to there, you're not protecting the professionals because the professionals can still have complaints regardless of, whether they're officially in a firm that's allowed to use the CPA license in their everything or not. So
Right.
I go back to very similar to what you said, Byron. It's like we are no longer protecting the public. We are just limiting the professional's use of something that is very near and dear and something we all worked hard for. And now there's confusion in the public
That's right.
because if we're CPAs, then how are they supposed to tell who's actually like qualified to do the work that they need versus not?
Right.
And is that predicated on working for an actual registered CPA firm? I don't think so. I think that's predicated on the individual that's
Well,
doing the work.
I think where you're going though, that ties back into the regulatory concern. So the original regulatory concern is that if someone sees that someone is providing them information and that someone providing the information has CPA on their name, the implication was that there was assurance tied to that information that was being provided. That's the original regulatory concern. And then before I forget, we do, because Liz, you said there should be a law. So there is the Uniform Accountancy Act, which is model legislation that I believe it's both NASBA and AICPA created
Right.
together. The challenge with that is that it has to be enacted at the state level. And so as each state enacts it, they create their own variation of it. Like Hawaii, again, is one of these ones where we have two different kind of state level associations that kind of fought over it and created this two-tier system. So we're one of those where even though there's the model legislation, it can get warped when it gets enacted because of politics, basically. So, but coming back, it's the regulatory concern is that, hey, if I'm providing information and I'm going to try and devil's advocate their side, it's,
Yeah.
hey, if you're a controller and you're signing off as a CPA, that someone receiving that information could be a lender, someone is going to go, oh, well, I can rely upon these financial statements because they're prepared by a CPA compared to an audit opinion, which I don't know, does the public actually understand the difference on those? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I kind of go too.
Yeah.
I'm like, for those of you that are just listening, Byron's like
But
shaking his head. It's like,
the
yeah, no.
public thinks CPAs are just tax preparers. Like if you talk to the average person on the street and you're like, "Oh, I'm a CPA," they start asking you tax questions. And so
Well,
CPA isn't even linked to assurance services for the masses. And so we go back to education. Like there's not been enough
that's right.
education of the public, or like brand awareness in a general sense of what does this actually mean. And at the same time, I think that people need to understand that just because the CPA looked at it doesn't mean they performed any assurance. And that's also where all those email disclaimers came from, right? Which we still see all over the place in every major
Sure.
firm, which is this is not an assurance statement. Just because the CPA looked at it doesn't mean we're assuring it or saying that any kind of statistical analysis was done on this work. It's just information and management use information at that for the most part. So I think that there's education issues. I think that there are definitely public issues in that the public does need to understand what this means and how this is used. And also, so does our profession. Like,
Right.
baby CPA needs to understand, like, they can't sign an audit opinion without doing an audit. But I think they do understand that, right?
Yeah, it's funny. It reminds me, I remember years ago when I worked in a public accounting firm, a memo went out that basically said, uh, if you volunteer or are part of a board for a charity board of any type, you are not allowed to be the treasurer. Basically, they said, as a CPA, if you become treasurer of uh, of one of these organizations, there is an assumption that you are basically servicing them as a licensed CPA under the firm's brand. So they basically barred us from being treasurers of any nonprofits because of the liability concerns that being a CPA brought in that role.
It's
That is an
funny you say
extremely conservative approach.
it is, but it's funny you say that because that actually makes me think too. I remember in some of the like litigation in terms of like protecting yourself from litigation. I remember hearing the same advice on there,
Right.
which is why like they're like, don't give tax advice, don't give even especially if you're not a tax CPA, don't give tax advice, don't do all this stuff, which is even why too, even to the point of my family when we were dealing with some estate issues. I was like, I I, I cannot chime in on this because I don't want any of you to perceive and end up coming back and saying, well, he said and he's the CPA on what it is. I'm like, I'm gonna get so I end up getting like my tax person. I'm like, hey, this is the situation. Can you tell us something about it? And then I would relay that, but I wouldn't give my own interpretation because it's so baked in my head, that risk of litigation.
So, guys, you've convinced me that a CPA license is a whole lot of risk and it doesn't actually give me any credentialing that's useful in any way because I can't use it to, help drum up business. So, what's the point?
Well, I mean, you do have to go back to these state boards and have a conversation and say, like, what are you really doing here? Or if you're just putting this level of handcuffs around you when you become a CPA, I mean, they are damaging the license. There is no doubt. And that's where, I remember, I mean, I don't know all of the details. Donnie, you might be more intimate with the Uniform Accountancy Act, but my recollection was that was primarily focused on the individual as a CPA, like for mobility, to be able to get my license in Maryland and move to Virginia and be able to work there. But I don't know that there was a lot of detail around um, giving firms the capacity to be a licensed firm in different states due to, I mean, there's some states where you have to have your name in your name, or you can't practice. You can't be Dark Horse Accounting unless Dark Horse is the name of your firm. Or, I mean, you couldn't have there's certain states where High Rock could not practice because
Well, I was the
the,
first to register in Arizona without a last name, and I had to present in front of the board and explain why it didn't violate their rules.
In today's world, cyber threats don't just target big businesses. They target you. Your small office or home office is at risk.
There are a lot of solutions out there. Not all of them have the same level of security. The Soho Protection Package is designed to provide proactive cybersecurity solutions.
If your firm is looking for assistance in developing your personalized IT policy, connect with an advisor today at link.improvetheworld.net/Soho Cyber. Gain peace of mind that you have the right technology in place to stay protected.
I mean, how bonkers is like some of these rules are just they have got to be changed and updated. And the other one, the big one that really is even creating this requirement for the alternative practice structure is the ownership rules. And I don't know that it makes sense to even have these rule requirements for licensed CPA firms to limit the ability to have owners that are non-CPAs.
Oh, that's a whole other can of worms that
Oh,
I
yeah.
vehemently disagree with you
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, completely disagree with you
But,
on that one. We just might have found a topic for
the,
another show.
well,
Let
I
me
mean, but that's actually the rub. That's what's causing these issues, though. That's the core of this issue.
Well, I disagree. I think that that's the symptom of the core issue being these laws are outdated and they were created under, a situation and an environment that no longer exists. And so the intention of the law is completely irrelevant because we are in a completely different world than we were when they were set up. And so
Sure.
they need to evolve and change. And also, if you take away the requirement for CPAs to own CPA firms, you will lose the integrity of the organization and it will become a big monopoly of a corporate environment where everything is driven for profits. And yes, that is the economy of late stage capitalism that we live in. And I completely understand that. And also, that removes the ability for CPA firms to truly be independent from anything other than the fiduciary responsibility to generate profits for investors who are no longer tied to the profession in any meaningful way. So let's change the outdated laws that are affecting the individuals and the professionals, not change the corporate structure that would have way bigger implications.
Well, but I don't know that we can fix that because, and I agree with you on that point wholeheartedly. These alternative practice structures are doing exactly what you just described because so we have those. We have the alternative practice structures where they are putting audit in a corner. They're taking everything else. They're calling themselves an accounting firm. They're practicing as if the general public sees them as a CPA firm. And they are not owned primarily by CPAs. So we have that with these alternative practice structures. So I think go ahead.
I want to build on that because I think that's the other part of the problem. So I agree with Liz. Part of the problem is archaic regulation. The second part of the problem, and you actually said it in the very beginning, Byron, these alternative practice structures are presenting LLC or LLP versus Inc. as the same thing. And with what it is it's causing brand confusion. So to
Sure.
me, the requirement should be if you're going to split it, the part that's not the firm needs to have a different name, needs to have a distinctly different name.
Yeah.
So naming whatever all aside, if you go to the heart of the rules around CPA ownership, right? And the rules around particularly the audit function being owned by CPAs, that is still being maintained. And granted, it may look different, but if you look at like corporate organization, when you have a board of directors, when you have executives in place, they have a fiduciary responsibility in a corporation to the ownership group. And that fiduciary responsibility is taken very seriously. And also, there's a whole lot of other regulation and laws around it. And if you violate that fiduciary responsibility to provide for investors and to provide, the board requirements that you're doing, you can be personally sued as an individual. So you presumably could put somebody in a position where they are a director of a firm. If you take away the requirement of the CPA, they're a director of a firm. They're reporting to a board of directors with a fiduciary responsibility to generate profits for this particular corporation. And at the same time, they have no history, understanding, or like any real conceptual background in what audit means and what it does. And so in that one law, you've completely erased all of the independent standards and everything that the profession has been working towards since 2000 and since the last time we had a completely unethical explosion of bullshit behind audit work, right? And I think that the reason that is so important to preserve is because a CPA first and foremost has a responsibility to the public. So our responsibility first is to making sure that these are ethical decisions that are being made for the company. The second responsibility is a fiduciary responsibility. If you change the practice structure, the first responsibility is a fiduciary responsibility, and the ethical considerations become secondary and become a really big gray area in law and a really big risk area for independence violations. Do I think that is already occurring inside of these alternative practice structures? 1000%, I do. Do I think that there is some preservation, and do I believe that the people that truly own those audit firms are trying to make good ethical decisions because they are CPAs underneath it all? Yes, I do. And so I think there's some preservation happening there. But if the first thought of this is let's go change the way that this happens, we will unnecessarily create a situation where our profession is complete bullshit. And then I go back to, why do I have a CPA license?
So I'm going to build off of that, and I'm going to come back to your question, Liz, which is why have the licensure? Why should we go through this? Which is in the end for my firm. So I mentioned when I started off, at first I wasn't going to be a CPA firm, and then I realized, oh, I have to because I want to use my CPA. And it wasn't until about 8 years later when I really it's actually when I went to AICPA Leadership Academy and I really realized what the brand CPA represented and why those of us that are CPAs feel that this is such an accomplishment and really embrace our duty to the public. At that point, I really realized that I need to instead of saying I'm an IT consulting firm, I need to put forward that I'm a CPA firm that happens to do this advisory work. And Byron actually hit on it earlier as well, which is there is a higher ethical standard, which is what Liz was just talking about. And so that's where when I go out to work with clients, one of the ways that I pitch what we do is I say, hey, we uphold the CPA standards of practice, which includes this whole ethics. And I have to put you, client, above myself and above my firm when we're helping you make decisions in an advisory capacity. So I cannot steer you towards a decision that I'm going to profit from personally just because I'm going to profit. I have to help you, client, make the best decision possible for you. And that's why we still till today have maintained a CPA firm, even despite, we've grown, we do even more non-CPA services now. We still put forward, we are a CPA firm and we require everyone in our firm to uphold the ethics.
Yeah. So the question, and I don't disagree with any aspect of what you all have said to defend the ownership structure of CPA firms, but what is that right formula? In Maryland, I believe I don't quote me on this, but I think it's 51% of the firm has to be owned by CPAs. I think different states have different percentages, which, also will determine where investment can happen without creating this confusion and breakup and everything else. Like, what is that percentage that should be acceptable?
Well, and I think that that percentage is pretty standard across the country. It's majority, and the majority means that the voting power is preserved by people whose requirements are ethical in nature first, before profitable in nature. And at this point, like, we are a CPA firm. High Rock is a CPA firm. I do believe in it. I say incendiary things because I want to hear your guys' opinions. But at the same time, I do think that there is value. There's a lot of value. And the fact, then getting back to the core of why we're talking about this at all, the fact that we're in a situation where a lot of people are not being allowed to use their CPA in any documentation or their business cards or their email signature or on LinkedIn, like that makes a big difference to the profession, and it makes a big difference to the individuals in the profession. And I think it's a shame that we are at a point where that is such a risk, and our, whatever is so conservative that we can't see past the fact that, there might be potential lawsuits or risks or whatever associated with it, and instead are focusing on limiting what that means versus educating the public and making it very apparent as to what that means. It's frustrating.
It is frustrating, and it's complicated. There's so many different aspects of this that I think are very difficult to navigate because I think one step absolutely would be we need a clear separation of these organizations. But there are what's really confusing to me, and frankly, I don't understand. Some of these alternative practice structures are not even allowing their audit partners to display their CPA. So there is, firms, if you look at their website that are, some of these firms, if you look at the audit partners, they do not have CPA displayed. There's nothing. So I think, if they're going to solve this, they're going to have to make even more rules, I think, about the separation of these non-licensed CPA firms from the CPA firm, and maybe even the shared ownership rules between the organizations, because I think it gets murky. And what we haven't really even talked about is the potential of independence issues between these organizations. I think that's also another element of potential issue in alternative practice structure land.
Well, which reminds me back to the 90s, I believe it was too, where we saw the big split off. I mean, that's where Accenture came
Sure.
from, right?
Accenture,
So we
yeah.
had those,
Mhm.
Bearing Point, I'm trying to think, all the consulting arms ended up splitting off. And then we had the blow up with Enron, and then we had the split off again with all of the things
Yeah.
that were happening there. So, it's something that I think we've struggled with, but I think, and I think as we've gone through this, I'm hearing this, that I'm thinking that the trend, or perhaps our call to action to both AICPA and NASBA, is really going to be, anyone that's earned a CPA should be able to display that. We need to relook at what is the public that we're actually protecting. Because Liz raised a really good point on, if this is all tied to assurance, well, the majority of the public actually thinks we're tax professionals. And
Mhm.
you don't have to be licensed to be a tax professional, because you could be an
No,
EA, you could be a nobody, no
you could just be a
credential, and
tax
do tax
preparer.
returns, right?
Yeah.
So there's no protection there. For those that are in assurance, isn't it actually other business people, so bankers and investors and things, that actually should, as part of their job,
Yeah.
understand what is being attested to or not attested to, right? So that's not the public anymore. Do we really need to protect that part, or prevent people from associating CPA with assurance or non-assurance in that sense? And then our other call would be to the public equity firms that are doing these changes. It's like, stop creating brand confusion. And if you can reduce that brand confusion, so that this part that is the CPA firm is clearly CPA firm, and the parts that not clearly is not, then we won't have all this additional market confusion around whether you're attesting or acting as a CPA firm or not.
Well, I mean, to your point about bankers not understanding CPA firms, how many times do CPA firms get asked for comfort letters on tax
So
clients
many.
where they're like, can this
Ugh.
business survive a distribution of $20,000 for a down payment on this person's home? And it's like, you want us to sign off on that from an assurance perspective, which
Right.
legally we can't. Like, there is no way to predict the future in that way, right? And so, but that is built into so many banks' workflows
Oh yeah.
and like foundational to what they're asking for from their clients. So, like, there's so many pieces of this that are unwinding historical issues and unwinding a misunderstanding, and then building upon a new foundation of what is reality and what does that look like. And I think it starts with a mass education campaign,
Right.
and laws that make sense.
So simple, nothing to it. I absolutely agree, and I mean the education is so huge. Nikki, my future wife, non-CPA accountant, she was just asked last week from a bank, "Can you sign these financials?" She's like, "Number one, I'm not even a CPA, so no, and number two, that's not how the world works." They don't even know. So yes, there is massive education that needs to happen, especially for the people who truly are users of financial information that accountants and CPAs are providing. And I would personally like to pass a law that says you are not allowed to present yourself as a non-CPA if you are a CPA. there's part of the I don't know, the part of being a doctor is the requirement to go into action. I think if somebody needs medical treatment, or there's something around that basically says I'm taking an oath that if I see somebody who needs medical treatment, I will give them medical treatment. And I think kind of similar in a sense. Like if you are a CPA, you don't get to hide that you are a CPA and have to operate under a code of ethics and everything else. If you're a CPA, it should be required that you have to show that you are a CPA. Just like when I go to my barber and they have their license up on the wall to show, because they're required to show that they're licensed.
So I wouldn't go as far to say that CPAs have to help people in financial distress,
No,
because that would
not quite that.
That's where I was pausing to.
No.
that would be a
I'm just saying
problem
there are
because
requirements
most of
as a
America
doctor.
is in financial distress.
You can't hide in the corner and say I'm not a doctor if you see that situation. That's my point.
Yeah, well, I like having the ability to hide in the corner when I see people making terrible financial decisions. I'm like, not my
Yes.
problem.
That's fair. That's fair.
Otherwise, I'd come off as a pedantic, probably, a little too much on the advice that's not requested side. But yeah, no, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and the overall intent is that having that license has value and it has meaning to the public as well, and should be proudly displayed. And there should be a requirement to show that, because you have people who are not CPAs performing some very similar activities. And how is the public to know the quality or the assumed quality and the assumed ethical guidelines that are becoming before that, right?
Without a doubt. So CPA tattoos for everybody that gets licensed.
Well, if we follow yours, it's across the head instead of on the arm, right?
Definitely.
Right on the neck.
On the neck.
You guys are getting a little creepy on me. We don't want to be reminiscent of concentration camps, guys.
No,
Let's
of
not
course not.
label our people.
That's fair. All right. Just a t-shirt then. You get a t-shirt.
You get a t-shirt. No. How about a polo? Like a nice CPA polo.
I was thinking a
It's like
button. Right? We have
just
Oh,
a
button.
button.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, I could do that. Like kind of like the presidential button, like
There you go. Yeah.
pin,
A
CPA pin.
pin. I got some CPA pins.
See, now you're making me wonder, is there a regulation against wearing CPA pins if you're not a CPA?
I'm sure there is. I mean, Byron's a walking, violation. So your CPA pin probably
It just
is
depends
too.
on which state he's in.
Oh, that's fair. Right.
Just have to be aware.
He just has to stay in Maryland because that's where he's licensed, right?
That's it.
You're
Absolutely.
confined to one state.
And so, for what it's worth, for everybody who wonders, is that person a CPA or not, there is a really great website, CPAverify.org, where you can look up and validate if people truly are CPAs.
Can't you do that on like every state board's website too?
Not every state board offers it. In fact,
Online?
the CPA Verify website has a list of a couple states that don't even participate with that. But generally speaking, most states are cooperate depending on how much information they give.
And if you are a state board and you don't have it online, you need to call Donny.
Get it.
Thanks.
Anyways, I think we've gone soup to nuts on this topic and uncovered a few other contentious topics to discuss in the future. In summary, I think all of us agree being able to display the CPA license has a lot of value, and these restrictions at the state level need some consideration from a regulatory perspective, and firms also need to consider this deeply and what it means and the implications to the future of our profession. The public needs some education, needs to back up and understand what the CPA actually means and what we do and how we operate, and we can assist with that publicly, and hopefully this is going some way to help with that. And also, Byron is a walking violation. So if you see him outside the state borders of Maryland, please report him to the appropriate state board of accountancy and await the disciplinary action for his tattoo that has been there far too long. Did I miss anything, guys?
That's a wrap. Thank you, Liz.
Well said.
Drop the mic.
Thanks for a fun conversation, guys.
See y'all later.
The Center for Accounting Transformation provides business professionals with a network for utilizing innovations that are ready for adoption, the training and resources necessary to apply those innovations, and an opportunity to engage the talent and community needed to further the pursuit of innovative accounting practices that drive responsible and mindful business performance. Find out more at our website, www.improvetheworld.net. And if you're interested in sharing your own transformation stories, please contact us there.